Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And in a recent video about the future of the game, Wargaming announced they were going to be buffing and nerfing 4 of your favorite vehicles. One of them being the Super Conqueror, which is one of the most popular heavy tanks at tier 10 inside the game. In today's video, I'm going to be letting you know exactly what Wargaming have planned for these 4 vehicles and what I think about the changes that they're possibly going to make, and whether these new vehicles, or should I say the changed vehicles in their new form, are going to be either super competitive or whether they're just going to no longer be worth playing with the nerfs. So firstly, let me clarify that all of these changes are being super tested and that their characteristics may change after the testing procedure. But as we've seen with previous super tests, Wargaming have pretty much put them in as is. So while I hope that this isn't just a bluff caveat, so to say, there is the chance that maybe they will see if there are any issues in the testing procedure. So firstly, let's talk about the Panzer VII. Wargaming suggests that this heavy tank isn't typically favored in random battles due to its shortcomings in firepower and armor. We believe it deserves more attention and consideration. To make the Panzer VII feel more confident in close range battles, we're improving its accuracy and aim time, penetration values for both of its rounds. They're also removing weak points on the mantlet to align it with the Clan Wars reward tank, the VK7201K. Now, while they don't provide any armor model for the mantlet, what they're probably talking about is this area here on the Panzer VII, where you only need about 225 millimeters to go through just to the left and to the right of the gun. Whereas when we look at the Clan Wars tank, we can see that, oh, that's exactly the same on the Clan Wars tank. Maybe just a little bit better towards right in the center. We can see the center of the VK is 270, whereas the Clan Wars tank is 370. So maybe that's what they're suggesting. However, if you were considering that the Panzer VII was going to lose the weak point just to the left and also to the right of the mantlet, I'm not sure that's the case, because that's also here on the tier 10 Clan Wars version, the VK7201K. Maybe what Wargaming is suggesting is they want to try and get rid of the areas towards the side here. However, I'm not sure if that's going to be the case either. If we take a look at the difference between these two tanks, I'd say the Clan Wars tank has pretty much just as many issues as the Panzer VII does. And while to the side here, it might be a little bit more prominent on the Tech Tree tank compared to the Clan Wars tank, this might be a case of what Wargaming say they're going to do, or at least what the community expect that they're going to do, and what the result is. It could be two different things. Without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest difference between the Panzer VII and the Clan Wars tank, the VK7201K, is the armor on the side. We can see that the Panzer VII, it's just one 160mm plate, which is super easy to pen when it's side scraping, whereas on the Clan Wars tank, it's actually tiered. It has 180 on the inside that goes to 170 and then 160. This is something that just doesn't exist on the Panzer VII. So at the moment, it doesn't look like Wargaming are going to be adjusting this, which is frankly by far the biggest disparity between these two tanks. One thing that's interesting as well is that, unless I'm an idiot, there's no mention to the fact that Wargaming are also planning on buffing the engine power of this tank by 150 horsepower. That will give this vehicle over a 10% boost to its horsepower per ton, which is going to make this vehicle oh so much more agile. The other buffs to this vehicle, the accuracy, it's interesting to me that Wargaming say that they want to make the VK feel, or should I say the Panzer VII, feel more confident in close range battles, so they're improving its accuracy and aim time. When I'm thinking about what I need in close quarters combat, I'm not thinking about accuracy and aim time. I feel like what that's going to do to the Panzer VII is make it better at sniping at decent distances or engaging weak points on enemy vehicles. One of the most interesting changes to this vehicle, however, is the 18mm of penetration buff on its standard rounds. That could make this tank very good for free to play. And not only that, they're buffing the gold rounds on this tank to 325. This is really interesting because up until this point, Wargaming have only really nerfed premium rounds apart from on extreme examples like the Type 5 Heavy and the AMX M454's larger guns, which had really bad penetration on their premium rounds. So pretty much every vehicle that's been adjusted recently has lost about 10 to 20 millimeters off its premium ammunition. However, with the Panzer VII gaining 10, it really makes me think that Wargaming are cementing what they consider to be a fair amount of premium penetration for a tier 10 tank to have. All in all, these Panzer VII buffs, do I think that they're necessary? Well, the Panzer VII is an interesting one because if we look at the win rate difference, aka how much of an impact it has depending on what your base win ratio is, we can see that the Panzer VII is pretty much right in the middle of the list. It's completely balanced with regards to the impact that it's having on its players' win ratio. It's doing better than tanks like the 277, the 54, the Rhinoceronte, the M5Y, the VZ55, the Kranvang, the 50B, and the Type 71. All tanks that I think would probably benefit just a little bit more than the Panzer VII would. I guess the thing is Wargaming are probably still looking at raw win ratio, and from raw win ratio perspective, the Panzer VII is 6th from the bottom with regards to tech tree tanks. But I can tell you, if this buff happens, it is not going to stay there. I just really hope the Wargaming aren't going too far, like they did with the AMX M454, as we had to spend pretty much half a year where the meta was just absolutely full of them, and those tanks were very hard to counter. With the Panzer VII, if they take away the issues with the mantlet, yeah, good luck trying to stop this thing coming around a corner like this against you, exposing 270 millimeters of lower plate, but also having the accuracy and the penetration to have more than a sting in its tail. Final word though, I think these buffs will definitely help the Panzer VII. Do I think it's going to become the new best heavy tank? It's going to be close. And while I personally think it's fine to have tanks be just average and are probably more friendly for beginning players to the average skill players, I don't see that statistically that this is going to destroy the game. Next, let's talk about the other tier 10 that's being buffed. It's the AMX 50 Foch B. Wargaming's primary objective is to enhance the 50B's autoloader to make it more comfortable and dangerous for opponents. We're focusing on the following improvements: reducing aim time, decreased dispersion after firing, enhanced stabilization during movement and hold reverse. Additionally, we'll boost its maximum reverse speed and its specific power. These enhancements will allow the AMX 50 Foch B to swiftly seek cover after utilizing the autoloader. Okay. These changes look terrifying. Firstly, one of the tank's big weaknesses, its ability to pull back after it's just clipped you for 2,400 damage, is going to be massively buffed. 4 kilometers an hour backwards means that once you've got the final field mod and you've put a turbo on this tank, that you're going to be going backwards at 21 in the Foch B. And remember, that is a standard turbo, and that is not what some people will put on it, a Bond turbo, which will allow this tank to go backwards at 23 kilometers an hour. In addition, that specific power buff to 22 horsepower per ton will truly make this more like a faster medium tank inside the game. The aim time buff to this tank is going to mean that you can aim faster after the reticle blooms out, but by far the most crazy buff to this tank is that they're reducing the dispersion after firing by an entire meter. Now, a lot of you might not know that there is a value that you won't see in the garage of the bloom that happens to your reticle after you fire. For the Foch B, it's 4. And this is one of the most important statistics on any autoloader. It is why people like to use things like a rotation device and also the new experimental turbo that combine together to create almost the effect of a decent vertical stabilizer on an autoloader, and it can revolutionize how the tanks are played. Wargaming buffing this value from 4 to 3, I think, is far too much. I think that this tank is going to be capable of absolute insanity with that build. The reticle just won't bloom out, and you're going to be able to just deliver your shots accurately to whatever is unfortunate enough to sit in front of you. In addition to that, they're buffing the gun dispersion traverse by 0.14 meters. That's got to be a typo. There's no way that's actually happening. No, what they're actually doing is they're changing it from 0.14 turret traverse down to 0.1, which is 0.04 meters. So Wargaming even making mistakes on their articles a day after their release. And what that means is it's the equivalent of having a gunner with 3 snapshots on this vehicle. That is going to be wild how little this vehicle blooms out. Now, when you take into account that the Foch B gets a fantastic field mod that reduces the bloom after firing by 0.15, or should I say 15%, which is actually far more impactful. If you were to use this thing with an experimental turbo, and you were also to slap a rotation device on this vehicle, you are capable of some staggering things. I very recently 3-marked the Foch B just last month, and I can tell you this thing is sickening. In the 15 games that I played, I averaged 4,700 damage, 780 assistance, 2.27 kills per game, and an 80% win ratio. Now, let me clarify, to achieve that, I did spam a lot of gold. Undoubtedly, the weakest thing about the Foch B is the penetration on its standard rounds. 257 is just not good for a tank destroyer. Its premium rounds at 325 are okay, but still bad for a tank destroyer. But if you're willing to spend pretty much 30,000 credits per magazine, the Foch B becomes one of the biggest pay-to-win monsters in the game. And I can tell you that if Wargaming go ahead with these buffs, that I think the Foch B is going to become absolutely broken. I think it will be game-destroying. If we take a look at the Foch B's win ratio currently, it's in the middle. But just like with the AMX 50B, its win ratio difference is quite low. However, if Wargaming put these buffs in, I can tell you the sweatiest of the sweaty nerds, just like me, are going to load full gold. And if a fairly mediocre player like me can manage to achieve this before the buffs, I can only imagine what people are going to achieve with the buffs. I honestly think these changes are going to be game destroying, and I would thoroughly recommend to Wargaming that they do not implement either the mobility changes or the bloom after firing change. If they want to change the aim time a little bit and the gun handling a little bit, that's fine. This tank is incredibly dangerous, and it doesn't need to get to a position where it is just driving around and clipping you out. If anyone remembers what the Foch 155 was like back in the day before it was nerfed, it was absolutely toxic. And this tank is going to be toxic in a completely different way. Another thing should be mentioned is that if Wargaming are planning on doing this to the Foch B, what are they planning on doing to the Foch 155? Are they going to leave it in the position that it currently is, where it's actually performing significantly worse than pretty much every other tank destroyer in the game, although it is in a position of being available in a bond store, and there's no prerequisite to learn the mechanics of going up the tech tree to get the vehicles, so that has to be taken into account. But if this happens, there will be zero point of having a Foch 155. You might as well just go Foch B, and unfortunately, it'll be a very pay-to-win tank. And so Wargaming, please be careful. I think this will be the apocalypse of apocalypse if the Foch B goes in with those kind of statistics. So to make it easier to be able to get up towards the Foch B, Wargaming are also planning on changing the statistics of the tier 9 and the tier 8 in the same way. And I can tell you, the Foch, the 50 Foch at tier 9 and the 48 at tier 8 will become very scary if they get anywhere near the kind of buffs that the Foch B are getting. Okay, so those are the two tanks that are getting buffed. Now let's take a look at the two tanks that are getting nerfed. Firstly, the Super Conqueror. Reduced firepower for fairness. The Super Conqueror is among the most powerful heavy tanks available for research. The number of battles is significant and can greatly influence the outcome of any battle. You know its strengths, tough turret, exceptional gun depression angles, and great damage per minute. It significantly influences the battle and operates well in any combat situation. As a result, the Super Conqueror boasts a high win rate in random battles and onslaught. We aim to temper its dominance without compromising its major strengths or playstyle. The Super Conqueror will remain a top-performing vehicle but won't determine the course of battle so much as before. To achieve this, we will slightly decrease its damage per minute, reload speed, and HP pool. Well, obviously damage per minute and reload speed go hand in hand, right? So firstly, I'd like to comment, Onslaught. Honestly, I didn't really see that many Super Conquerors in Onslaught, but maybe that's because I was playing towards more of the gold or the champion leagues in Onslaught. Maybe up in Legend, they're playing Super Conquerors all the time, although I'm really not sure that is going to be the case. And honestly, I don't really want to see Wargaming balance tanks for a game mode that a very small amount of the population actually play. Whereas if they want to change how effective these tanks are in Onslaught, they could just nerf the Super Conqueror's ability a little bit. Please, Wargaming, don't get into the habit of adjusting how vehicles are based on their Onslaught performance at all. Onslaught is an irrelevant game mode for 90% of your players, and you shouldn't take it into the equation when you're looking at what you should buff or nerf on tanks. So Wargaming are planning on removing 100 hit points off the Super Conqueror. Obviously that's going to suck a little bit, but not the biggest of deals. It's like the equivalent of losing half a durability device. They're going to make the reload 0.9 seconds longer, and they're going to lower its damage per minute down to 2,500. So this will undoubtedly affect the Super Conqueror, losing some of its damage per minute, but it's not going to lose as much as the Chieftain did. The Chieftain went to 2,200. The Super Conqueror will stay at 2,500, and you'd expect that considering it does have less alpha damage. It's very interesting to me that Wargaming aren't taking away any of the Super Conqueror's hull down capacity. And that is what's really nice about the tank, that when you do get into that position, the upper hull is great, unlike the Type 71. It has ridiculous side armor on this tank as well. That's very, very hard to be able to get through if if you're able to get through it at all. And if it's using its gun depression, unless you have heat, you have no chance of being able to go through the top. And it's only if it's not using any of its gun depression at all that armor-piercing rounds have even a hope of being able to get through the tank. That is what's so good about this vehicle. Now, what do I think? Do I think that the Super Conqueror needed this nerf? Well, if we take a look at the win rate difference, the Super Conqueror, it's performing pretty good. If we take a look at the raw win ratio, the Super Conqueror is second best. So I'd say, yeah, the Super Conqueror probably needed a little bit of an adjustment. However, what I do think is that if they do this, then its main competitors, the T110E5 and the 60TP, are just going to become even more powerful. And when we take a look at the amount of battles that tanks are being played, the 60TP is more popular than the Super Conqueror, and the T110E5 is on the up. If the Super Conqueror does take this nerf, people will just clearly shift to the 60TP. They'll clearly shift towards the T110E5. And I think the 60TP will be the main benefactor out of this, because the 60TP versus the E5, if you load gold and you just shoot the weak point on the E5, I think that the 60TP mostly wins. Also, keep in mind that the T110E5 can't side scrape against a 60TP because the 60TP can overmatch all of the lower hull when it tries to side scrape. So the 60TP versus a T110E5 completely dominates. So I think the biggest winner out of this will be the 60TP. I can only see that tank becoming more and more meta. And while I can understand what Wargaming are doing with the adjustments of the Super Conqueror, whether I think that it was completely necessary, I don't really see Super Conquerors breaking games that I'm playing. But I think that they are only adjusting it a little bit. And while it will definitely push it down the list, and it won't be my most recommended tier 10 heavy for all players to be able to get, I really don't think that this is going to kill the vehicle in any shape or form. And when we took a look at what Wargaming did with the Chieftain, for example, it's still getting the second best win ratio difference, and it's still getting the third best win ratio overall. So Wargaming clearly didn't kill the Chieftain. They just made it less popular inside the random queue. One thing that's interesting is I can't find any mention of Wargaming wanting to adjust the other British tank destroyers down the tech tree. So what this means is that maybe you'll just want to keep playing the Conqueror at tier 9 and not actually move up towards the Super Conqueror, because there's very little difference between the two vehicles. Accordingly, I would still recommend to go up the British heavy tank tech tree. It's just the Crown in the line will have lost one of its jewels. Next up, let's talk about the Conqueror Minotauro, the changes to armor and maneuverability. So when the mighty Conqueror Minotauro uses its terrain to expose its cabin with its upper glacis plate, it becomes almost invulnerable. This heavily armored tank destroyer has a reputation as a formidable opponent and can frustrate many commanders on the opposing team. I do agree. The Italian tank destroyers are just too good, especially the tier 9. When the tier 9 just sits in front of you down an alleyway when you're playing like tier 8 or tier 9 tanks, it feels like there's so little that you can do to be able to deal with it. So Wargaming's goal is to create a situation where it remains challenging for lower tiered vehicles to penetrate its frontal armor. However, accurate aiming and high penetration values at tier 10 should provide a more balanced competition with this TD. To achieve this, we will reduce the armor hatches and certain areas of the frontal protection to increase the chance of penetration. We'll also decrease the Minotauro's HP pool and special heat shell velocity. Interesting one. I guess for people who spam heat at long range, that's going to be a bit more of a pain. Additionally, we'll increase its specific power and chassis traverse speed, slightly adjust other statistics. These changes will collectively make Minotauro more vulnerable while retaining its strengths. Okay, so buffs and nerfs. So Wargaming are improving its traverse speed. They're improving its engine power significantly. That's pretty mad, considering that once you get a decent turbo on this vehicle already, it's pretty good. They are destroying the heat shell velocity down to 950, so that'll definitely make it harder to snipe. They're improving the dispersion when it moves, but making the tank's dispersion worse when it turns its hull. They're shaving off its hit points by 100, and the main thing here is front hatch armor is going down to 180 from 70. So it's a bit of a shame that Wargaming aren't showing us armor models. When you think that the Minotauro, we need to see armor models, Wargaming. Why aren't you showing us this? But I guess what I can do is I can go and take a look to see which hatch they're talking about. So we're looking for a hatch that's 250 millimeters thick. Okay, so it's not the one on the left. It looks like it's the one on the right. Looks like what Wargaming are going to do is they are going to change the hatch on the right from 250 down to 180. Well, I can tell you, if they change that to 180, ooh, you're probably only going to need 250 millimeters to go through. If the tank's using its gun depression, however, you're probably going to need, what, about 300 millimeters to go through still. So I don't think the Minotauro is going to be destroyed. The main concern will be is if they take armor off the frontal turret. In their video, I saw somebody showing like a guerrilla heat round going through the front of the turret, but I can't see any mention to the front of the turret. Okay, no, I just saw it, and certain areas of the frontal projection. So again, I can only guess. What are they going to do? Are they going to nerf? The whole of the front of the turret is 300 millimeters. So if they nerf that down, that's going to be pretty brutal. And if they give this thing a weak point on top, that is going to be very brutal to have to deal with. But let's be honest, they needed to do something because this was just insane. This is the protection against 330 millimeters. And the result is that the Minotauro has just been this super easy tank to play. Its win ratio has been climbing and climbing and climbing as it becomes more meta inside the game. It's got the best win ratio, even better than the Hori 3. And if we take a look at win ratio difference, it is absolutely smashing ahead. So I'm really happy that Wargaming are nerfing the Minotauro, because I think as it becomes more and more popular, it's going to be just brutal and game destroying, especially when you go all the way down a flank in a heavy tank and then there's just a Minotauro just sitting there going like, now what, bro? And while some people would argue, well, that slows the game down and we don't want the game to get any faster, all that I think it really does is it prevents the game from being progressive. And so I think that this is a good change to the Minotauro. I'll have to wait to see how much Wargaming actually want to destroy that turret front. Look, if Wargaming make it so that the turret front can just be easily penned by gold rounds, I think that's a big mistake. This is such a large tank, I think it would be a terrible mistake to allow the front of the turret to be penned. Wargaming, it's enough to give it a weak point on top. Make the weak points, is what I'm trying to say. If they make these weak points, then it will just encourage the Minotauro player to move around, to avoid the shell, to not sit static. And as we can see, its lower plate, it's not particularly wonderful. I think just creating weak points on top of this vehicle will stop it from being the juggernaut on a ridgeline. And I don't know why Wargaming would be buffing other aspects of the tank. It seems like why would they buff aspects and not just nerf its hit points and give it a weak point on top? Honestly, if they nerfed its hit points, gave it a weak point on top, and didn't buff anything else about the vehicle, I think it would still be good, and it would just go into a position where it wasn't quite destroying the matchmaker as much as it does. So Wargaming are planning to make similar adjustments to the other vehicles in the Minotauro branch. They're apparently going to weaken the armor of the hull's upper plate and increase the chassis traverse speed and dispersion from the chassis rotation for the Tier 9. Well, that's bizarre, because my biggest problem with the Tier 9 Italian tank destroyer has to be that you just can't pen the thing on the top of the vehicle. So I see what Wargaming's problem with this tank is that it doesn't have any weak points on top that then they can just adjust the values of. So with the Minotauro, they're doing a quick fix and just shaving off some of the some of the armor off one of the weak points that it has. But on the Conqueror, it doesn't have any weak points that they could model. What Wargaming could do is, I don't know, they could go and actually change the model of the vehicle and give it a weak point so that people could be able to shoot. What Wargaming are planning with this vehicle is to just change the upper hull to be weaker so that people can shoot the upper hull. And everybody who's played the Type 71 will know just how frustrating it is and useless to have a weak upper hull. So that could definitely hurt the Conqueror at Tier 9. I'm still a little bit concerned as to how you're meant to deal with this thing with lower tier tanks, even if Wargaming do make these adjustments, as it will have no weak point on top. There's nothing that you can stop a Conqueror from just sitting in a position. But then again, if they take that aspect away from the vehicle, what is going to be the point of even playing the tank? And Wargaming are apparently going to reduce the armor and lower plate of the Tier 8. That's brutal, because the Tier 8, that's one of the main strengths of the tank, is that you can just sit in front of Tier 6 and Tier 7s and not have to worry about them. But considering the vehicle is the second best performing tech tree Tier 8 vehicle, and if we take a look at its win rate, it's the second best as well, behind the T28. Yeah, I think it's fair that Wargaming adjusting the statistics of this tank. Biggest winner will be the T28 at Tier 8. When they nerf the CC67, that is going to be the current best and even better kid at its tier. So all in all, interesting changes by Wargaming. I feel it's bizarre that they're wanting to target these tanks. And what I truly hope that Wargaming are not doing is they're just going and taking a look at, which tanks are people not playing at Tier 10? Why is nobody playing this German heavy? Why is nobody playing this French tank destroyer? let's take them even though they're balanced and just make them better so that we force people to have to grind down the tech trees if they want to have that new OP tank. Otherwise, this could just end up being AMX M454 version 2 2024 edition. And with regards to the nerfs, I agree with the Super Conqueror nerf. It's not going to kill the tank. With the Minotauro nerf, I really think the Wargaming could have just frankly lowered its hit points and given it a weak point and not needed to do anything else. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my opinion about the buffs and nerfs coming possibly in a future patch of World of Tanks. Really hope you enjoyed this breakdown. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Let me know what you think about the buffs and nerfs in the comments down below. Do you think that they're outrageous, or do you think that they're okay and they're going to give you a reason to want to play the vehicle? And how do you feel about the idea that Wargaming might be taking tanks that are performing pretty okay in the matchmaker and buffing them purely because they're not very popular? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.